Supreme Commander Varraxian drummed his crystalline fingers against the obsidian war table, creating a rhythmic chime that echoed through the high command chamber. The holographic displays surrounding him painted his iridescent scales in a kaleidoscope of tactical readouts and battle projections. 12 pairs of compound eyes from his most trusted generals fixed upon him, awaiting his reaction to the latest intelligence reports. So he said, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into the standard galactic common. These humans think they can match the might of the Varraxian Dominion with their what did you call it, General Krell. General Krell, a veteran of 3 galactic campaigns, fluttered his wing casings in what passed for amusement among their species. They call it basic training, Supreme Commander. Apparently they spend months teaching their warriors how to walk in straight lines and fold their sleeping cocoons. A ripple of chittering laughter spread through the war chamber. Even the usually stoic Admiral Krell allowed her antenna to twitch in mirth. "Show me," Varraxian commanded, gesturing to the central hologram. The air above the war table shimmered, revealing footage captured by their long-range surveillance drones. Columns of human cadets marched across muddy fields, scaled walls, and crawled under primitive wire obstacles. Their movements seemed painfully slow, their formations laughably rigid. "Look at them," Colonel Zena exclaimed, her phosphorescent patches pulsing with derision. "They waste precious solar cycles learning to assemble and disassemble their projectile weapons. Our warriors emerge from the spawning pools with combat protocols already encoded in their neural matrices." More laughter filled the chamber, but Supreme Commander Varraxian noticed something odd about the footage. He raised a hand for silence, his scales shifting to a deeper shade of purple, a sign of intense concentration among his kind. "Play that section again," he ordered, pointing to a particular sequence. The one with their hand-to-hand combat training. The hologram zeroed in on 2 human cadets grappling in what their species called a sparring match. What had caught Varraxian's attention wasn't their technique, which seemed primitive compared to Varraxian neural-enhanced combat, but rather the subtle variations in their movements. "They're adapting," he murmured, more to himself than his commanders. "Each human is fighting differently, learning from their opponent's mistakes." "Surely that's inefficient," Supreme Commander General Krell interjected. "Our warriors execute perfect combat sequences every time, optimized through millennia of genetic programming." Varraxian was about to respond when a priority alert flashed across his neural interface. His scales rippled with concern as he processed the information. "Speaking of our perfect warriors," he said slowly, "can anyone explain why Outpost Sigma 9 has gone dark? The one facing that human training facility we've been monitoring." The laughter in the chamber died instantly. Admiral Krell quickly accessed her tactical display. "Impossible. We had 3 full battalions stationed there. The humans are still in their training phase. They couldn't possibly." Her voice trailed off as more red alerts began flooding their strategic displays. One by one, Varraxian forward positions along the human border were going silent. "Perhaps," Supreme Commander Varraxian said, his scales now pulsing a dangerous shade of crimson, "we should review those training footage again. And this time, let's pay attention to what these humans are actually learning, not what we assume they're wasting their time on." The war chamber remained deathly quiet, the earlier mockery forgotten as the implications began to sink in. These humans and their primitive training methods had somehow accomplished what no species had managed in 10,000 years. They had caught the mighty Varraxian Dominion completely off guard. Scout Commander Vex Thor slithered through the undergrowth, his chameleonic scales perfectly matching the earthen terrain beneath him. 3 cycles of careful observation had taught him that humans relied heavily on visual detection, a weakness his species had evolved beyond eons ago. His bio-enhanced sensory organs picked up every vibration, every change in air pressure, every thermal signature within a kilometer radius. Observation log, cycle 3, rotation 247. He subvocalized into his neural recorder. Human training facility remains active. Primitive projectile weapons practice continues. Their accuracy rates are concerning. Through his compound eyes, he watched a group of humans practicing with their weapons. Each shot found its mark with increasingly impressive precision, but that wasn't what troubled him. It was the way they communicated, subtle hand gestures, slight nods, movements so small they would have been invisible to less sophisticated observers. They appear to be developing a non-verbal communication system, he noted, possible adaptation to counter our electromagnetic interference capabilities. A sudden shift in air pressure made his dorsal spines tingle. Something was wrong. The ambient temperature had dropped by 0.3 degrees. Microscopic variations in the local magnetic field suggested movement, but his thermal scanners showed nothing. Possible anomaly detected, he whispered into his recorder. Implementing Stealth Protocol 7. The words died in his throat as a shadow materialized seemingly from nowhere. A human figure, clad in some kind of adaptive camouflage that had fooled even his enhanced senses, stood less than 3 meters away. Before Vex Thor could activate his quantum displacement device, 2 more figures appeared, forming a perfect triangle around him. Well, one of the humans spoke, their voice modulated through what appeared to be a primitive breathing apparatus. Looks like our little sensor bafflers work better than expected. Vex Thor's secondary brain kicked into overdrive, processing combat scenarios. His species was naturally superior in reflexes, strength, and sensory awareness. By all scientific metrics, these humans should be no match for him. Your primitive ambush tactics are futile, he declared, rising to his full height, nearly 3 meters of gleaming scales and neural-enhanced muscle. I am an elite scout of the... The human on his left moved. Not the practiced, predictable movement his combat algorithms had been programmed to counter, but something entirely improvised. A projectile not fired from a weapon, but thrown by hand detonated near his sensory cluster. Not an explosion, but a burst of sound and light. His neural interfaces went haywire. Secondary and tertiary sensory systems crashed as contradictory input flooded his neural network. The humans had somehow identified the exact frequency to disrupt his enhanced senses. Fascinating species. Aren't you? Another human voice cut through his disorientation. We've been studying your kind too. Those fancy scales? Great for camouflage, but they're hypersensitive to certain sonic frequencies. Those enhanced senses? Amazing, until they all feed you different information at once. Vex Thor tried to engage his emergency protocols, but his muscles wouldn't respond properly. The humans had adapted their tactics specifically to counter his species' advantages. How? When? They were supposed to be primitive, predictable. Don't worry, the third human said, approaching with what looked like restraints. We have lots of questions about your fancy technology. Like those neural recorders. Very impressive. Almost as impressive as good old-fashioned observation and adaptation. As darkness crept into his vision, Vex Thor managed one final transmission to High Command. Most urgent warning. Humans are not practicing warfare. They are perfecting it. They learn. They adapt. The transmission cut off as his consciousness faded. The last thing he saw was one of the humans retrieving his neural recorder, studying it with what his species recognition protocols identified as curiosity. Not triumph, not aggression, but simple, dangerous curiosity. The 3 human Special Forces operators exchanged glances through their visors. Command's going to love this, one said, securing their captive. Looks like those primitive training exercises paid off. Who knew all those hours practicing in electromagnetic dead zones would come in handy? Better call it in, another replied, already packaging up samples of the aliens' technology. Tell them Phase 2 is ahead of schedule. These guys really should have paid more attention to what we were actually training for. As they disappeared into the darkness with their prisoner, they left behind no trace of their presence, just as they had practiced countless times in those primitive training exercises their enemy had so casually dismissed. Grand Admiral Nix stood proudly on the command deck of the Dominion's flagship, the Stellar Devastator, as his fleet of 300 warships emerged from hyperspace near Proxima Station. The massive space station hung against the backdrop of Proxima Centauri's crimson glow, a supposedly easy target for the most powerful armada in 5 sectors. Battle formations, exactly as calculated, he announced, his bioluminescent patches glowing with satisfaction. The humans won't even have time to power up their primitive defense systems. The tactical display showed their fleet arranging itself into the Dominion's standard crescent attack pattern, a formation that had brought victory in 17 major battles. Their quantum sensors swept the area, detecting only minimal power signatures from the human station. Sir Tactical Officer Raza reported, her tendrils twitching with confusion. The station appears to be running on minimal power. Their weapon systems are offline. Life support is at 10%. Nix's facial scales rippled with amusement. They've already surrendered. Perhaps they're not as foolish as... His words were cut short by a blinding flash. Where the rear guard of his fleet had been, now floated only debris and expanding gas clouds. What happened? He roared, his scales shifting to combat red. Unknown, Sir Raza's tendrils whipped frantically across her control interface. No energy signatures detected, no missile launches, no beam weapons. Another flash. Another section of the fleet disappeared. The tactical display showed nothing, no attackers, no weapons fire, just ships vanishing in brilliant explosions. Impossible. Nix slammed his appendage against the command console. Deploy the psychic shields. Activate the quantum detection grid. Sir, we're detecting thousands of small objects throughout the battle space sensor, Chief Cole announced. They appear to be simple metallic spheres. Nix's secondary heart nearly stopped. Mines? But our sensors. Not powered, Sir Cole interrupted, his voice trembling. They're completely inert. Just hollow metal spheres filled with primitive chemical explosives. Our quantum sensors are calibrated to detect energy signatures, not crude physical objects. The human station suddenly blazed to full power. Massive hangar doors slid open, releasing swarms of small, agile fighters. Unlike the elegant, energy-based weapons of the Dominion, these human ships bristled with solid projectile weapons and missile racks. They're not attacking our ships, Raza observed with growing horror. They're hurting us, driving us into the minefields. Nix watched helplessly as his perfectly organized fleet scattered in panic. Ships designed for grand fleet actions found themselves unable to track the nimble human fighters that darted between them, using the Dominion's own vessels as shields against their allies' weapons. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the station communications officer, Vex announced. A human face appeared on the main screen, wearing what Nix's cultural database identified as a grin. Admiral, the human said, I trust you're enjoying our little demonstration of asymmetric warfare? We've studied your battle tactics. Very impressive, very organized. Perfect for fighting enemies who play by the same rules. Another series of explosions rippled through the fleet as more ships blundered into the invisible minefield. But you see, the human continued. While you were laughing at our primitive training exercises, we were learning something you forgot long ago. There are no rules in war, just winners and losers. Nix's scales paled as he finally understood. The powered down station, the crude mines invisible to advanced sensors, the small fighters that turned his fleet's size against itself, the humans hadn't even tried to match the Dominion's technology. They had simply found ways to make it irrelevant. All ships, emergency retreat, he ordered, but it was too late. The human fighters had systematically destroyed their hyperspace engines while herding them through the minefields. An interesting thing about space combat, the human commander mused, as if giving a lecture. Fancy energy shields work great against energy weapons. Not so great against good old-fashioned tungsten rods moving at relativistic speeds. As if to demonstrate, a barrage of solid metal projectiles tore through his fleet's remaining ships. No energy signatures to detect, no way to deflect them, just unstoppable kinetic energy. You should have paid more attention to our training exercises, the human said. All those hours practicing with primitive projectile weapons? We weren't stuck in the past. We were preparing for this exact moment. The stellar devastator shuddered as multiple impacts breached its hull. Nix watched his mighty fleet, the pride of the Dominion, being systematically dismantled by tactics so primitive that no one had considered defending against them. Send this recording to High Command, he ordered, even as his bridge crew abandoned their posts. Tell them we didn't lose to superior technology. We lost to superior thinking. The human commander's grin widened. Oh, don't worry, Admiral. We made sure your quantum communications array was one of the first things we destroyed. Can't have you warning the others about our primitive tactics, now can we? As his flagship broke apart around him, Grand Admiral Nix finally understood the true meaning of terror. The humans hadn't just outsmarted them, they had turned the Dominion's every advantage into a weakness. And somewhere out there, more human fleets were preparing to do the same thing to every overconfident alien armada they encountered. The Battle of Proxima Station would go down in history not as a great clash of technologies, but as the day the galaxy learned that true military supremacy comes not from having the most advanced weapons, but from knowing how to use whatever weapons you have in ways your enemy never expects. Base Commander Rixus paced nervously across the quantum crystalline floor of Fortress Station Beta, his claws clicking against the transparent surface. The latest reports from the front lines had him deeply troubled. One by one, their forward outposts had gone dark, and now an unsettling silence had fallen across their communication networks. Status report, he barked at Communications Director Quara, who sat surrounded by holographic displays showing nothing but static. No change, Commander Quara replied, her tentacles dancing frantically across multiple control surfaces. 78% of our quantum relays are non-responsive. The remaining ones are showing strange readings. Define strange, Rixus demanded, his scales shifting to an anxious purple. It's as if Quara hesitated, as if they're being copied. Duplicated. But that's impossible. Our quantum encryption. The main lights suddenly flickered and died, leaving only the emergency bioluminescent strips casting an eerie glow through the command center. Rixus felt his primary heart skip a beat. Security Chief Nalax's report. The security chief's voice crackled through their internal comms, tight with tension. Sir, our defense grid is acting erratically. The humans, they're somehow using our own quantum relays against us. They've turned our communication network into a weapon. A massive holographic display materialized in the center of the command room, but instead of their usual tactical readouts, it showed footage from their own security cameras. Footage of human soldiers, moving like ghosts through their supposedly impregnable defenses. But how, Rixus whispered, watching as human strike teams systematically disabled their security systems. Our sensors should have. Sir Quara's voice rose in panic. They're not using advanced technology at all. They found ways to use our own system's sophistication against us. Those primitive training exercises we monitored, they were practicing how to move between our sensor gaps. The footage showed humans in what appeared to be crude armor, but Rixus realized with growing horror that their seemingly primitive gear was perfectly designed to exploit the blind spots in Varraxian detection systems. They weren't trying to block or jam the sensors, they were simply moving in ways that the advanced algorithms had been programmed to ignore as irrelevant. All sectors, full alert, Rixus commanded, but even as he spoke, more systems began shutting down. Not through any sophisticated cyber attack, but through carefully planned physical sabotage. Commander Security Chief Nalax's voice came through again, now barely a whisper. They're inside the quantum core, but our internal sensors show nothing. They're using analog tools, mechanical devices, things so simple our systems don't even recognize them as technology. The last emergency lights died, plunging the command center into darkness. In the silence that followed, Rixus could hear something that made his scales stand on end: footsteps. Simple, quiet, purposeful footsteps. To all commands he transmitted on their last functioning channel, we severely underestimated the humans. They haven't been developing more advanced technology. They've been learning to defeat advanced technology using the simplest means possible. The transmission cut off as a human figure stepped into view, visible in the dim glow of Rixus's own bioluminescence. The human carried what looked like simple rope and mechanical restraints, no energy fields, no quantum locks, just basic physical restraints that their sophisticated security systems had never been programmed to detect. Fascinating security system you have here, the human said, their voice carrying no electronic modification or enhancement. Very advanced, very complex, very predictable. As more humans emerged from the shadows, Rixus finally understood their greatest mistake. They had laughed at human technology, never realizing that true advancement sometimes meant knowing when to take a step backward. The humans hadn't tried to beat them at their own game, they had changed the game entirely. The Silent Strike, as it would come to be known, marked the beginning of the end for Varraxian technological supremacy. They had built their empire on the assumption that progress only moved in one direction, never considering that sometimes the most sophisticated approach was the simplest one. War Minister Thaxon stared at the tactical display with all four of his eyes, watching as another sector turned dark red. His command bunker, buried deep beneath the surface of Centauri Prime, had become a tomb of broken doctrine and shattered certainties. Play it again, he ordered, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. The captured human transmission filled the command center once more. A simple video message, broadcasting on every frequency, showing human soldiers in their training grounds. But this time, they were training with captured Varraxian weapons, mastering them in days what took Varraxian warriors years to perfect. 30% of our fleet has gone dark, reported Admiral Xenox, her crystalline exoskeleton dulled with stress. The humans, they're not just defeating us, they're learning from every encounter, adapting, evolving. A junior communications officer burst into the room, his scales flashing emergency patterns. Minister, the humans are broadcasting directly into our neural networks. Impossible. Thaxon rose from his command throne. Our quantum encryption. The words died in his throat as every screen in the bunker switched to the same image: human soldiers demonstrating how they had deciphered Varraxian combat protocols. They had turned their own training exercises into psychological weapons, showing the galaxy exactly how they were dismantling the greatest military force ever known. The 7th Fleet is requesting emergency orders, Admiral Xenox announced. Their commanders report fear, sir. The warriors are afraid. Thaxon's secondary heart nearly stopped. Fear was not supposed to be possible. Their warriors were genetically engineered to be fearless, yet the humans had somehow infected them with this primitive emotion. What are your orders, sir? The question hung in the air, heavy with desperation. Before he could respond, a new transmission cut through their frequencies. The face of a human commander appeared, but instead of threats or demands, they simply showed footage of human cadets practicing new techniques with salvaged Varraxian technology. Notice how they train, the human said calmly. Not to follow protocols, but to break them. Not to rely on technology, but to transcend it. Every defeat you hand us becomes a lesson. Every weapon you field becomes our new tool. The bunker fell silent as they watched humans demonstrate exactly how they had reverse-engineered Varraxian quantum shields into simple, portable disruptors. Their primitive projectile weapons now fired rounds designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses they had discovered in Varraxian armor. Your military doctrine is impressive, the human continued. Perfect even. And that's exactly why it failed. You built an unbeatable system, then stopped learning. While you were laughing at our cadets for practicing basic skills, they were learning how to think beyond systems entirely. Admiral Xenox's exoskeleton paled as tactical data streamed across her neural link. Minister, the humans aren't just winning battles. They're using our own combat data to predict our strategies before we execute them. Thaxon watched helplessly as more sectors went dark. The humans had turned their own technological superiority into a vulnerability. Every quantum encrypted transmission, every neural combat protocol, every piece of advanced technology had become a window through which the humans could observe, learn, and counter their every move. We must adapt, he whispered, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. Like they do. But even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. Their warriors, bred for perfection, couldn't comprehend the fluid, evolving tactics of their human opponents. Their technology, designed to be unbeatable, had become a rigid framework that the humans exploited with devastating creativity. The turning point wasn't marked by a grand battle or a decisive engagement. It came in the moment when the mighty Varraxian military realized that their greatest strength, their unchanging perfection, had become their fatal flaw against an enemy that treated every defeat as a lesson, every battle as a chance to evolve. Thaxon looked at his commanders, seeing the same realization dawn in their eyes. They hadn't lost to superior technology or overwhelming force. They had lost to a species that had turned warfare itself into a training ground, and their perfect military machine had proven no match for the terrifying adaptability of human innovation. Supreme Commander Varrax stood in the ruins of the Centauri Outpost's command center, watching through shattered quantum glass windows as the last remnants of his once mighty fleet burned in the atmosphere above. The pristine walls, once gleaming with advanced technology, now bore the scars of simple ballistic weapons and mechanical breaching tools. Send the final transmission, he ordered, his scales dimmed to a deep blue of resignation. But sir, his last remaining officer, Lieutenant Kara, protested, the humans will intercept it. That's precisely the point, Varrax replied, activating his neural recorder. This message isn't for our forces. It's for whoever comes after us. The recording began, his voice steady despite the sounds of human forces breaching the lower levels of the outpost. To all spacefaring civilizations who may encounter humanity, this is Supreme Commander Varrax of the former Varraxian Dominion. I record this warning not in defeat, but in revelation. We did not lose this war today. We lost it the moment we started laughing at human training methods. Multiple explosions rocked the building. Not energy weapons, but simple directed charges, systematically destroying their defensive positions. The humans never tried to match our technology, he continued. They never needed to. While we mocked their cadets for practicing with primitive weapons, they were learning to defeat everything we had built. They turned our strengths into weaknesses, our advantages into vulnerabilities. Through the broken windows, he watched human drop ships landing in formation. Their design was simple, practical, devoid of the elegant but predictable patterns his people had perfected over millennia. Even now, as they breach our last fortress, they're learning. Every room they take teaches them new tactics. Every piece of technology they capture becomes another tool in their arsenal. They don't just adapt, they evolve with every passing moment. Lieutenant Kara's scales flashed warning patterns as human forces reached their level. "Sir, they're here." The greatest military force in known space, Varraxian spoke faster now, defeated not by superior weapons, but by superior thinking. We built perfect systems. They learned to break them. We relied on unbeatable technology. They found ways to make technology irrelevant. The main doors buckled under precisely placed charges. Not random destruction, but carefully calculated demolition, learned from countless previous engagements. To those who come after us, know this: do not underestimate humanity because their methods seem primitive. Do not dismiss them because their technology appears inferior. What you see as weakness is their greatest strength, the ability to learn, to adapt to. The doors burst open. Human soldiers moved in with practiced precision, their weapons trained on vital points that only weeks ago they hadn't known existed. They had learned Varraxian biology, perfected their tactics, evolved their strategy. "This is Commander Rachel Martinez," a human voice cut through the chaos. "Supreme Commander Varraxian, your forces are defeated. Your transmission has been allowed to continue as a courtesy." Varraxian turned to face her, noting how the human soldiers moved with confidence through the advanced technology surrounding them. They had mastered it, not by studying it, but by learning how to defeat it. "Tell me, Commander," he asked, "did you know from the beginning? Did you plan this all along?" Martinez smiled, but there was no mockery in it. "Every defeat taught us something new. Every time you laughed at our training, we learned another way to surprise you. That's the difference between us. You built a perfect system and stopped learning. We never stop learning." As the human soldiers secured the command center, Varraxian made one final recording: "Remember this day." Not as the fall of the Varraxian Dominion, but as the day the galaxy learned a crucial truth: true military supremacy lies not in having the most advanced weapons, but in never stopping to learn new ways to fight. The humans didn't defeat our technology. They defeated our certainty. The war ended not with a grand space battle, but with a simple surrender in a broken command center. The mighty Varraxian Dominion, masters of quantum technology and neural combat protocols, had been defeated by a species that had turned warfare itself into an endless training exercise. And somewhere, in countless human military academies, cadets were already learning from this victory, preparing for whatever challenge would come next.